Two rooms, identical in just about every way. Rooms that look like classrooms, and you walk into each. They're decorated the same way, a table in the middle of each room, a chair on either side of the table, and a proctor on one side of the table as students walk in, one at a time, and sit down at the table. Two rooms, two lines of students, each going in one at a time and sitting at the table as the proctor looks at them and says, I have a puzzle. Would you like to work on this puzzle? In both cases, the students say, sure. And they work on the puzzle. And pretty quickly they solve it because it's an easy puzzle. They solve the puzzle, and then the proctor on the other side, because they have a script, looks down at the script and knows exactly what to say. And each of them make one statement that differs in one room from the other. After that statement, they both resume back on the script, and the script is exactly the same, and they both say, I have a harder puzzle. Would you like to try it? You may not get it done, but do you want to try? In one room, over 70% of the students say yes. In another room, over 70% of the students say no. And the only difference between these two identical rooms with identical tables and identical chairs and identical proctors and identical scripts is one sentence. And that one sentence has such a tremendous impact on whether or not they say yes or no. The study was done in New York, and it wasn't done once. It was done several times by a PhD out there named Carol Dweck. She then moved from Columbia University over to Stanford and did it again, except this time with high schoolers and college students and adults. And every time there were identical rooms and identical tables and identical chairs and identical proctors and identical scripts, and one sentence that differed between the two rooms. And the one sentence changed everything. In both cases, one room said, I'm good, I'm fine, no need. And the other room, people said, sure. Most of the sentence that differed was actually the same set of words. So it's just a few words that had such tremendous impact. And we'll hold on to that for just a second. We'll come back and look at that in just a minute. But I want you to imagine sitting in a room just like this only 20 years ago. I want you to imagine sitting in a room just like this, and there's a person speaking on stage just like this, and you're standing or sitting somewhere in the room just like this, and there's some folks in the back. And as the person puts something on screen and starts talking about a new way to write code, a new way to develop and program software, and they double-click and they drop a form on the screen, and then they double-click and they drop a button on the screen, and you got form 1 and you got button 1, and they double-click button 1, and they write a little bit of subroutine code right there. It just echoes out of print, hello world. And as they write this code, they're talking about something called garbage collection, which if you're not a programmer, you're like, what does this have to do with the mafia? But it has absolutely nothing to do with the mafia. It has to do with the allocation of memory. And when you, in old days, write code, you allocate memory to variables, you allocate it to programs, and this guy's on stage, and he's talking about this code, and no need to do any garbage collection. It's just automatic. And while you're sitting in those seats 20 years ago, and someone's talking about how you don't have to worry anymore about garbage collection, there's a couple people in the back. And they're just commenting, and they're talking, and you can hear them. They're not trying to be quiet. And they're taking a jab. It feels like they're taking a jab at you, but they're actually just taking a jab at the code on the screen, because that's Visual Basic. And the C programmers in the back are like, that's not real code. That's not real programming. Only here's the thing. Doesn't matter that C programmers had to do their own garbage collection. Because if you jump 20 years before that, you got some guy sitting up here on stage, and he's talking about pointers, and he's talking about allocation of memory, and he's talking to C programmers, and in the back there's a couple guys. and they're poking fun at the stuff on stage because they're like, that's not real programming. I address the memory on the actual motherboard. Because the guys in the back, oh, they write machine code or they write assembler, and they look at these C guys with a compiler, and they're like, letting the computer do most of the work. And so they look out on the crowd and they say, that's not real programming. You're not real developers. I want you to imagine that you're not 40 years back or 20 years back, but you're imagining maybe you were in a room like this just last week or a month ago. And there's a guy talking on stage at a place like this, and he's talking about CSS and HTML, and there's a couple folks in the back. And they're giggling because they're saying, that's not programming. You're just formatting text. You're not a programmer. That's not real code. See, here's the thing. From the beginning of time, there have been people who've looked at other people and said, that's not real programming. That's not real code. And every year, things get easier. And every year, things get more automated. And every year, you and I and other people get to step into this world. And every year, there's a group of people standing in the back and saying, that's not real programming. That's not real code. You're not a real person. And yet, here's the reality. We're real. We're all real. And if you get caught listening to that lie, if you get caught, see, the truth is they're not the worst critics, right? Oh, they sit in the back and they make their comments. But you're your worst critic, aren't you? Because you have backstage pass to your life. And when you look at everybody else, you're looking at their highlight reel. You see the very best of what they're doing. And you see all the junk in your own world. I have a friend who starts talking, and she's built up a business, and she's grown it dramatically, year over year, and diversified all sorts of revenue streams, and she's a success, any way you slice or dice it. But the first words out of her mouth is, I don't write any code. As a way to say, no, don't put me in that, I'm not real. Don't start talking PHP to me. She's her worst critic. You're your worst critic. In those two identical rooms with two identical tables and two identical proctors and two identical chairs and people that walk in and listen to identical scripts, one sentence different. In one room, after they had completed the simple puzzle, the proctor said to them, "Great job. You must be smart." And 70% of those kids said, "I'm not interested in trying anything else." 70% of those kids said, "I've already achieved what I wanted to achieve. There's no reason to try anything harder." So it's called a fixed mindset. You look at what you know as a fuel tank, and it's either full or it's not full, but that's just the nature of the beast. That's what you got. In the other room, the only difference was the sentence that said, "Wow, you finished it. You must have worked hard." The only difference was whether you were praising intelligence or effort. And because they were praised for their effort, over 70% of the people that were praised for their effort said, "Sure, I'll try another. I may not make it, but I'll give it a shot." It's called a growth mindset. And in that paradigm, the dynamic is that when you're praised for effort, you'll put in more effort. And you'll learn more. When you think about it, it's not a fuel tank. It's not a fixed amount of what you know or don't know, because it can expand. How you think about how you think can change how you think. I want to say that again, because I know it's early. Some of you haven't even had coffee. I can tell because you're not smiling. How you think about how you think can impact how you think. If you believe that what you know is fixed or what you can know is fixed, it will be fixed. If you believe that you can learn more and grow more, you can learn more and grow more. I want to end this morning and kick off our time together. I want to encourage you to walk into every room and stop worrying about what you know or don't know. I want you to step into a room and absorb as much as you can, take as many notes as you can, and even if it flies over your head, just jot it down and keep struggling, keep pushing through. But I want to end my time with you this morning by telling you a story of a guy named Hiru. In 1945, Hiru was dropped off in the Philippines on an island. Part of the Japanese army, he was told by his commander in 1944, you do not give up. You take care of your team and you take care of your rifle. And so Hiru was there in 1944 on one of those islands in the Philippines, and he went up into the jungles and up into the hills, and he had two different teams of guys, and he started working with them, and they started collecting intel. And they split up, and they started fighting over the small amount of food they had left, and some of them took off, some of them died. But Hiru remembered his commander's words, you will not give up. You will keep fighting. I don't care if you run out of rice, I don't care if you run out of food. You'll eat coconuts, you'll eat bananas, but you will live and you will never give up. And so he didn't. It came down to just two of them. And eventually, his buddy died. And it was just one of them. Now, over the course of time, they'd seen pamphlets fly from the sky, and it said, hey, the war's over. And they read it, and they're like, I think this is a trick by the Allies to get us to come out of the mountains so they can kill us. And so they stayed. Oh, they had jeeps come by with bullhorns shouting out and letting people know. The war's over. They're like, that's just a trick, and they stayed. Because he remembered, I'm not going to give up. He kept his rifle and his uniform in perfect condition, and he kept fighting, and he kept surveilling, and he kept watching. Because he didn't know when the Japanese army was going to need him. Until a dropout college student in Japan decided to go find Hiru. He'd become a legend. No one had ever found him. They'd predicted that he was dead, but when they found the recent body of his buddy, they were like, maybe he's still out there. And the college student went out to the Philippines and found him and said, hey, buddy, the war's over. And he said, I won't quit until my commander comes and tells me it's time to go. Here's the thing, though. The commander had flown back to Japan, got married, raised a family, had grandkids, and was working in a bookstore. And the college student flew back to Japan and said, hey, I need you to come with me because Hiru is still in the jungle. And so 30 years later, the commander flew out to the Philippines and met them and told Hiru, the war's over. 30 years after being dropped off on the Philippines, he came out, pristine uniform, perfect gun, having never given up. On the one hand, it's a fantastic tale of a guy who never gave up. It's a true story of someone who understood the mission and said, I'm going to keep going. And if I could tell anything to you, I would tell you, it's a 30-year fight to keep learning and to keep growing and studying. And so keep on doing what you're doing. Keep coming to these events and go into the rest of these sessions and learn as much as you can and keep growing for the next 30 years. But it's also a cautionary tale, right? Because Hiru was fighting the wrong battle for 29 years. He was fighting a fight that wasn't worth fighting. He was fighting a fight that was done. He just didn't know. I'm predicting that 20 years from now, there's going to be a couple guys sitting in the back corner while someone's sitting in a room like this and someone's talking in a stage like this. And they're going to be saying, that's not real code. That's not real programming. You're not a real developer. I want to encourage you to understand that that's the wrong battle. Don't get get caught in it. I don't care what they have to say. I worry about what you tell yourselves. I'm not a real developer, I'm not a real designer, I'm not a real programmer. I just configure websites, I just adjust websites. I don't know real programming, I just do a little CSS. Stop it. It's the wrong fight. Believe that how you think about how you think will have an impact on how you think. And trust me when I tell you, 20 years from now, you'll be smarter and fighting the right fight. Thank you very much.